The night was silent until a notification shattered the calm. John Miller stared at his glowing phone, his pulse racing as the words cut deeper than any blade. His partner, David, had stolen from him. John whispered, "This cannot be real." Betrayal burned through his chest as if iron chains locked his ribs. He had given years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and boundless faith, and now it was collapsing into dust. The office, once alive with ambition, felt like a graveyard of broken promises. His brother-in-arms had become his executioner. Thunder rumbled outside, echoing his despair. John clenched his fists, fury and grief flooding him in brutal waves. His mind flashed to his employees, his investors, his family, all depending on him. He muttered, "Why did you do this, David?" This wasn't just a theft of money, it was the destruction of trust. The knife of treachery twisted deep, and John knew this was only the beginning of a nightmare he could never have imagined. John pressed his palms against the desk, cold wood grounding him as panic spread. He thought of the years spent pitching to investors, chasing every dollar, and fighting for a dream bigger than himself. David had walked beside him through late nights, sleepless deadlines, and uncertain beginnings. Now John realized every memory had been poisoned. Was any of it real? He muttered. The betrayal was more than numbers on a balance sheet. It was a crack through his soul. The storm outside beat harder, raindrops racing down glass like his tears waiting to fall. He felt the weight of silence press on him, as if the world knew his empire was crumbling. Betrayal from a stranger would have hurt, but betrayal from David carved into him like a cruel masterpiece of ruin. The question gnawed. How much did David take? How long had he been planning this? John felt darkness circling, a predator waiting for him to break. He staggered to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The city below sparkled with indifference, alive while his world fell apart. He remembered how David once said, "Well, build something no one can break." The irony twisted in his gut. John's reflection stared back, hollow and broken, his own eyes questioning if he had been blind to every warning. Betrayal wasn't sudden. It was planted like a seed long ago, watered by greed and hidden smiles. He felt trapped, not just in his office, but in his own shame. His phone vibrated again, but he couldn't lift it. He whispered, "I should have seen this." The city lights blurred through tears, glowing like cruel reminders of what he was losing. Each flicker outside mocked his fall. The storm raged harder, but inside John stood frozen, a statue of failure. John forced himself to sit, body trembling as exhaustion pressed down. He opened his laptop, desperate for proof this was all a mistake. Each line of the account confirmed the theft, every number a stab to his gut. David hadn't just stolen money, he had stripped John of trust. The cursor blinked, cruel and silent, as though daring him to act. John whispered, "You planned this, didn't you?" Rage boiled under despair, but helplessness drowned it out. He was trapped in his own office, a prisoner of betrayal, while the storm's thunder mocked him outside. For years, David had been the one person John leaned on, the one he believed unshakable. Now the truth was glaring, his foundation had been rotten, and he had never seen it. The phone buzzed again, this time with messages from employees asking about delayed payments. John's heart clenched tighter. The betrayal wasn't private anymore, it would ripple through every corner of his company. Families would be affected, dreams crushed, because of one man's greed. He buried his face in his hands, voice cracking. How do I tell them? His empire was built on hope, and hope was now ashes in his palms. He imagined tomorrow's headlines, investors calling, employees whispering. The storm outside howled louder, as if the world demanded he face the truth. John lifted his head slowly, eyes bloodshot, jaw set. This betrayal might destroy him, but he would not hide. The nightmare had begun, but he would fight to breathe through it. Morning light crept through blinds as John Miller sat slumped at his desk, the storm of last night still echoing in his chest. His phone vibrated with unanswered calls, but he lacked the strength to face them. He thought of his journey. from working late shifts in diners to scraping together enough savings to launch his dream company. He whispered, "I built this with nothing." Memories surfaced of empty apartments, instant noodles, and the hunger that fueled his vision. Betrayal was cruel, but it could not erase the path he had taken. His loyal friend, Sarah, had always told him his heart was his greatest weapon. John closed his eyes, hearing her voice, "You are more than the numbers." The world wanted him broken, but deep inside he felt a flicker. A single flame still burned. He clenched his jaw, whispering, "I'm not done yet." Even in his despair, he knew his story was far from over. John stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The storm washed away, but the streets still slick with rain. The city bustled as if nothing had changed, but for him, everything had. He walked past strangers, each face unaware of the firestorm inside him. He remembered his first pitch in a crowded cafe, where Sarah had encouraged him even when others laughed. He thought of nights coding until dawn, driven by belief in something bigger. His hands shook, but his voice steadied as he whispered, "I can't quit now." For every betrayal, there were people who had believed in him, people who had trusted his dream. The air felt cold, but with each step his spine straightened. The world might see him as broken, but inside, determination was stirring again. He wasn't ready to give up the fight. Back at his apartment, John collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion crushing him. The small space felt suffocating, walls lined with old notebooks, scribbled ideas, and reminders of his journey. He stared at a photo of him and David celebrating their first office lease, now a painful reminder of trust shattered. Rage threatened to consume him, but then his eyes landed on another photo, him and Sarah at their first pitch night, smiling despite rejection. He heard her words again, "Failure is only a step." John gripped the frame tightly. He realized his dream wasn't dead, only wounded. Betrayal had shaken him, but it hadn't defined him. He whispered, "I still have me." For the first time since the storm, hope edged into his chest, fragile but real. John dialed Sarah's number, his hand trembling as the call rang. She answered, voice steady and calm, "John, I know." He froze, then whispered, "How do you always know?" Sarah sighed, "Because I believe in you, even when you don't." Her words cracked something open in him. For so long he had seen himself as an underdog clawing at survival, but she reminded him he was a fighter. They talked for an hour, her voice weaving strength into his broken pieces. She told him, "This betrayal isn't the end, it's the test." Tears filled his eyes, but his chest felt lighter. He finally breathed deeply, feeling life rush back into his lungs. Sarah's faith anchored him when his own had faltered. By the end of the call, John whispered, "Thank you, I'll fight." And for the first time, he believed it. Later that night, John sat at his desk again, this time with fresh resolve. He opened a blank notebook, writing in bold strokes, "Rebuild." The words stared back like a challenge. He outlined new ideas, new strategies, each line carved with determination. His mind was still scarred by betrayal, but his heart felt alive. He whispered, "If I fall, I'll rise harder." The city outside glowed with indifferent lights, but he no longer felt alone in the fight. Sarah's faith echoed in him, the memory of struggle hardened into fuel. Betrayal had threatened to break him, but instead it had forged steel. He closed the notebook, eyes burning with determination. This was no longer just survival. It was war. And John Miller was ready for battle. John returned to the office, the air thick with unease. His employees looked at him with anxious eyes, whispers filling the silence he once commanded. He forced a smile, but inside his chest burned. He thought of how David's betrayal had not just stolen money, it had stolen stability. Paychecks were delayed, bills unpaid, and the fear of collapse hung like a shadow. "We'll get through this," he told them, though doubt gnawed his soul. Each word felt heavy, fragile, yet his voice carried strength he didn't feel. He remembered Sarah's faith and clung to it, even as his team's stares questioned his ability. John was drowning, but he could not let them see. His company was not just bricks and computers. It was people, families, dreams. The storm inside him was growing darker, and this was only the beginning of the fight. That night, John met Sarah at a quiet diner. She leaned forward, eyes filled with concern. "You can't fight this alone," she said softly. He shook his head, staring at the untouched coffee in his hands. "If I don't fix it, everything falls apart." The walls of the diner hummed with chatter, but their table felt isolated, a battlefield of choices. Sarah pressed on. "You need allies. You need to face David head-on, don't you?" John's throat tightened at the thought of confrontation. He remembered their years together, the laughter, the promises. Facing David now felt like staring into the abyss. Yet Sarah's voice anchored him. "Strength isn't about never falling, John. It's about standing up when the world wants you down." He nodded slowly, determination beginning to replace despair. John tried securing a loan the next morning, sitting across from a stern-faced banker. Each word felt like a plea wrapped in desperation. The banker shook his head, pointing to the numbers on the screen. "Your partner's actions have made your company unstable," he said flatly. John's fists tightened under the table, shame burning his cheeks. He whispered, "I can fix this." But the banker's silence was answer enough. John walked out into the cold air, his chest hollow. The rejection cut deeper than he expected, not just because of the lost funding, but because it made the betrayal more real. Each closed door echoed with David's laughter in his mind. The system had branded him weak, and the walls were closing in. That evening, John sat alone in his car outside the office, rain streaking the windshield. His phone buzzed again, investors demanding answers. He couldn't breathe, chest tight with panic. He hit the steering wheel, shouting, "Why did you do this, David?" His voice cracked as tears blurred the neon city lights. He saw his reflection in the glass, a broken man disguised in ambition's armor. He remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and felt rage ignite through despair. He whispered to himself, "If I don't fight, it all dies." The storm inside matched the rain outside, pounding harder, louder, daring him to quit. But beneath the chaos, a fragile voice whispered hope. The fight wasn't over yet. The next morning, John entered the office to find whispers had become open panic. Employees gathered in small groups, their faces pale, their voices hushed. Rumors spread that the company was on the edge of collapse. He walked past them, every step heavy but purposeful. Standing at the center, he raised his voice. "I won't lie to you, we've been betrayed, but we are not finished." The room fell silent, eyes locked on him. Inside, fear gnawed at him, but his words rang with fire. "If we stand together, we will survive this storm." His heart pounded as silence lingered. Then Sarah stepped forward, nodding. One by one, others followed. A fragile unity sparked. Betrayal had fractured them, but John's defiance stitched them back, even if just for today. The spreadsheet glowed like a confession under a spotlight as John scrolled through hidden transfers that threaded into a shell account. He whispered, "You buried the trail in plain sight." Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her voice low and steady. "Follow the vendor codes." Pattern emerged. Invoices to a fake compliance firm tied to a rival conglomerate. John felt the floor tilt as he read the director's name. "Victor Hale." He muttered, "Hale has been circling us for months." The logs showed midnight approvals issued from David's credentials, each transaction routed through the same proxy. John said, "This wasn't panic, this was planned." Sarah pointed at a flagged email, her jaw set. "Here's a calendar invite, marked as a charity dinner." The attachment revealed a term sheet offering David a guaranteed role after collapse. John breathed. He sold the fall. The truth hit like thunder, and it changed everything. Morning came without warmth as John met Emma Reed in a quiet conference room. The attorney's tone was even as she said, "This looks like coordinated fraud and corporate interference." John nodded, his hands tight around a legal pad. "David partnered with Hale to crater us." Emma scanned the term sheet, then lifted her eyes. If this is real, you need leverage, not rage. Sarah folded her arms, voice sharp. We need a confession or a trace we can defend in court. John felt both fury and shame rising like heat, knowing he had missed the early signs. Emma said, record-keeping, consent and chain of custody will decide the battlefield. John whispered, I will not lose my people to his deal. Emma slid him a checklist, crisp as a blade, then gather proofs and keep your temper on a leash. Resolve hardened like steel in his chest. John confronted David in a rooftop parking deck that smelled of rain and hot asphalt. David's smile was casual, the kind that had once disarmed investors. John said, Hale offered you a parachute if I crashed. David shrugged. You were too slow, John. The words burned. John stepped closer, voice low. You routed payments through a fake vendor and timed outages to our demos. David's eyes narrowed. It was just business. John felt his pulse thunder as he forced calm into his breath. You killed families' paychecks for a title, he said. David laughed softly. You think this industry rewards virtue? Wind pushed a newspaper across their feet like a fallen flag. John whispered, I built this with faith. David's voice turned cold. Faith is for losers. The city hummed beneath them, unaware of the war being declared. Back in the office, Sarah pulled server logs that traced a maintenance script to an external IP tied to Hale's security vendor. She said, They planted a kill switch inside our update pipeline. John felt the shock sharpen into focus. He whispered, They cut us during investor demos to prove we were unstable. The timeline aligned with every public stumble, each failure engineered to feed a narrative. Emma's voice on speaker was measured. This is sabotage layered over fraud. John's shame softened into resolve as he saw the architecture of the attack. He said, We expose the story, not just the theft. Sarah nodded. We show the method, motive, and beneficiaries. Emma added, And we do it legally, or it all burns down. John stood taller, the map of betrayal now a blueprint for war. That night John prepared a trap, assembling a data room with timelines, invoices, and trace routes. He recorded a message to David, his voice level and calm. He said, Meet me tomorrow and bring the original contracts. He sent a second note to Hale's aide. We are closing the asset sale discussion. Sarah asked, You're baiting them into confirming the terms? John nodded. On my ground on my tape with my counsel. Emma's email chimed, I'll be 2 doors away with an affidavit. John looked at the city and felt the fear thin into purpose. He whispered, I will end this. The screen's glow cut a hard line across his face, half shadow, half light. He saved the files, checked the recorder, and exhaled. The twist had become a plan, and the plan would become a reckoning. The boardroom was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioner. John stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared, eyes burning with resolve. Across from him, David leaned back, smirking like a man untouchable. Victor Hale sat beside him, polished and confident, flipping through a folder of fabricated contracts. John placed his recorder on the table, its red light blinking. He said, Before we begin, everything here is being documented. Hale arched a brow, amused. David scoffed. You think threats can save you? John opened his folder, revealing timestamps, transfers, and logs. His voice was calm, yet edged with fire. This is the truth, and this room will decide your fate. The tension crackled like static in the air. Each second, a coil ready to snap. David leaned forward, voice sharp. You can't win, John. Investors already doubt you. Hale has the capital, and I have the plan. John's jaw clenched, but his tone remained steady. A plan built on theft collapses in daylight. He slid another document across the table. A trail of payments routed through Hale's shell firms. Hale's smile thinned. Sarah, seated to John's right, whispered, Push him harder. John looked straight into David's eyes. You didn't just betray me, he said. You betrayed everyone who believed in us. David's smirk faltered. The silence was broken only by the soft click of Emma's pen as she prepared notes in the corner. The battle lines were drawn, and no one could retreat. Victor Hale finally spoke, his tone smooth as silk. "Business is war, John. You were naive to think integrity wins battles." John's reply was ice cold. "Maybe not battles, but it wins wars." He pressed play on the recorder, David's voice spilling into the room. "I'll make sure the update fails. Hale will back me after the crash." Hale's face hardened, the mask slipping. David lunged for the device, but John's hand slammed over it first. "Every word is archived," John said. The boardroom air grew heavy, the storm outside rattling glass panes as if echoing the confrontation. For the first time, John saw fear flicker across David's eyes. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about exposing the rot before it consumed them all. David's voice rose in fury. "You think you're the hero, John? You're nothing without me." John stood, shoulders squared, his voice unwavering. "I was something long before you, and I'll be more without you." Hale shoved his chair back, muttering, "This meeting is over." But Emma's voice cut through like a blade. "No, it's just beginning." She placed her affidavit on the table, every log and contract notarized. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. David's defiance cracked into anger, then panic. He shouted, "You'll destroy us all." John leaned across the table, face inches from his betrayers, and whispered, "No, David, you destroyed yourself." The room erupted in silence, heavier than thunder. The confrontation peaked as David slammed his fists on the table, veins visible, desperation breaking his facade. John didn't flinch. "This company will survive because we believe in more than greed," he declared. Sarah added firmly, "and because we stand together." Hale's silence was his admission, his once confident mask now fractured. Emma gathered the papers calmly, sealing them like chains around David's fate. For John, it was not victory yet, but it was power reclaimed. The storm outside calmed, rain easing into a steady rhythm, as though the world itself exhaled. John looked at his team, his voice softer but unshaken. "This is our fight, and it isn't over." For the first time in days, the weight on his chest lifted. The climax was not an end, but a beginning. The boardroom emptied, leaving John, Sarah, and Emma standing among scattered documents. The storm had passed, yet silence felt louder than thunder. John pressed his palms against the polished table, exhaling deeply. He whispered, "We survived the worst blow." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "You proved to them, and to yourself, that truth still matters." Emma gathered the evidence into her case, saying, "The law will handle Hale and David. Your focus must be rebuilding." John nodded, his chest lighter though bruised. For the first time, the weight of betrayal shifted into clarity. The empire might have been scarred, but it was not destroyed. He whispered again, "This was never about money alone, it was about who we are." And in that moment, he knew survival had already become rebirth. Later that morning, John addressed his employees in the main hall. Faces lined with worry turned toward him, waiting for answers. He raised his voice with steady conviction. "You've heard rumors, and they are true. We were betrayed." A murmur spread before he lifted a hand. "But betrayal is not the end. It is the test of what we stand for." His eyes swept across the room, each face a reminder of the lives tied to his dream. Sarah stood beside him, her presence grounding him. "We will not crumble," John declared. "We will rebuild together, stronger than before." The hall grew quiet, tension melting into resolve. Applause began softly, then spread until the room thundered with unity. John's chest swelled as he realized trust could be restored. Not by denial, but by truth. That evening, John sat with Sarah on the office rooftop, the city glowing below them. For once the skyline felt like a promise instead of a threat. He said quietly, "I thought betrayal was the end, but it was the mirror I needed." Sarah smiled faintly. "You learned who you are when everything was stripped away." He laughed softly, a sound unfamiliar after days of tension. I was scared of losing it all, he admitted. But I see now, the dream was never just mine. Sarah replied, That's why it will survive. The wind carried the smell of rain as the city pulsed with life beneath them. For the first time in weeks, John breathed without heaviness, hope settling into his bones. The next day, John met an investor who had once doubted him. The man leaned back, skeptical eyes scanning the reports. John's voice was calm but firm. Yes, we were hit hard, but we are stronger for it. Every failure was engineered, and we fought it with truth. The investor frowned, then asked, Why should I believe this company can still rise? John's answer was simple, steady, unshaken. Because the people here aren't giving up, and neither am I. Silence stretched until the investor finally leaned forward, saying, Prove it in the next quarter. I'll back you. John shook his hand, gratitude and resolve mixing in his chest. Trust wasn't given freely anymore, it had to be earned. And John was ready to earn it. That night, John walked alone through the office floor, empty desks glowing softly under the dim lights. He touched the back of a chair, remembering laughter, stress, and resilience that filled the space. He whispered, We are still here. He looked at the wall where their first vision board hung, edges torn but words bold, Build something that lasts. His chest tightened with pride. Betrayal had tried to bury them, but instead it revealed their roots. He switched off the lights, the city's skyline flickering in reflection against the darkened glass. His voice carried softly, Tomorrow we begin again. The moment felt sacred, not as an ending, but as the quiet birth of something new. The courthouse steps were crowded with cameras flashing like lightning, questions flying like arrows. John walked down slowly, Sarah at his side, Emma close behind. David and Hale had been indicted, their names etched in disgrace. Reporters shouted, How did you survive betrayal? John paused, lifting his head high. By remembering who I was before the world tried to break me, he said. The crowd grew quiet for a moment, his words cutting through the chaos. He felt the weight of months of fear, betrayal, and struggle fall away with every step. For the first time, he no longer walked in shadows, but in defiance of them. The city roared around him, but his voice carried above it, steady and unshaken. This is not the end of my story. It is the beginning of the real one. Later, John returned to the office floor, where his team gathered, eyes filled with both hope and uncertainty. He stood before them, heart steady, and said, What we built was almost destroyed, but from that fire, we found our strength. His voice resonated in the silence, heavy with meaning. Sarah nodded beside him, adding, We are not victims, we are builders. Applause rippled through the room, hesitant at first, then stronger. John's chest swelled, not with pride, but with gratitude. These people had chosen to stay, even when everything told them to run. He thought, This is why we fight, not for profit, but for each other. His voice softened. Together we rise again. And in that moment, hope became action. At dusk, John visited the old cafe where his first pitch had failed years ago. The smell of coffee mixed with memories of doubt and laughter. He sat in the same chair, tracing the wood grain with his hand. He whispered, This is where it began. Sarah joined him, setting down 2 cups of coffee. And it's where you learn that rejection isn't death, she said. He chuckled softly, a sound lighter than before. He looked around at the strangers filling the space, their chatter reminding him that dreams never stop moving, even when people falter. He leaned back, smiling faintly. It all makes sense now, he murmured. Betrayal, failure, even loss, they were pieces of a larger story. The one that had forged him into more than a survivor. He was now unbreakable. That night, John stood alone on the rooftop again, city lights flickering beneath a clear sky. He closed his eyes, feeling the cool air wash over him. Betrayal no longer haunted him, it had sharpened him. He whispered, I am still standing. The skyline stretched endlessly, and for the first time it didn't intimidate him. It inspired him. He imagined the next venture, the next battle, the next creation waiting to be born. He clenched his fists, not in anger, but in resolve. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, "You are more than the numbers." A faint smile crossed his face as the wind tugged at his shirt. The night felt infinite, and so did the road ahead. This was no ending. It was a new dawn, disguised in darkness. The final morning broke with sunlight streaming into John's office. He stood before the vision board, words faded but still bold. "Build something that lasts." He whispered, "We almost lost everything, but we found ourselves." Sarah entered quietly, setting fresh plans on his desk. "It's time," she said with a smile. John turned, his face calm yet fierce, and replied, "Ice. It's time." He walked to the window, the city alive with possibility, every building a challenge, every light a promise. He thought of David, of Hale, of Betrayal's shadow, and knew none of it defined him. His story had only begun. With one last look, he spoke words that would echo in his soul forever. "Dreams survive betrayal. And so do I." The screen of his life faded to black, leaving his voice ringing like a vow.